Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another fantastic and incredible episode today. Now, I do have to go off for a little bit. You know, generally when we get the conflict questions, they're brilliant. They're on topic. They're about the topics I want to discuss and the current affairs, and they're most of the time they're like that, but sometimes you're going to have episodes where they don't have that. And so there is a lot of topics from last week that I was expecting that we're going to have a lot of questions about. You know, there's the new Pope, there's the new Ye song or Kanye song, whatever you want to call him, extolling a certain German political leader. And I got no questions about these, but I did get questions about what's my favorite royal family. Not that that's a bad question, but sometimes you wonder if there's or you're not wondering, but it's always best to go with current topics for these questions, and sometimes we aren't delivered that. So just for the kind of lead in the future, we love the questions. They're usually brilliant. They're never really bad, but if you're wanting to ask a question for Monday, let's get with the current news. Let's go with the current news topics of what people are discussing. And last week it was all about the new Pope, the HH song. I don't know how YouTube's going to censor this stuff, but HH, we'll call it that. I think most listeners would know what I'm referring to. And continuing debates over the woke right, which I've gotten questions about the woke right before, so it's not like anything new on that. But there were no questions about it, so I was wondering what the Twitter feed of other people were. But that's fine. I'm gonna go off on the new Pope anyway. People are wondering, I was like, when are you just gonna go off on topics? And well, since I didn't get any questions, I was planning to talk about the new Pope anyway, for briefly as the first topic. I'll discuss that. Woke right, we have an article about that should be out tomorrow. And the Ye song, there might be a question roll in at the end, depending on time. We might just punt it to the mailbag. But yeah, we like the current news topic. So if you're looking for questions to ask, let's go with things you're seeing on Twitter and things you're seeing on the news or CNN. And we like the questions about ancient Rome and royal families and other great stuff, but that might be better for mailbag or for IQ supplements. So we like to stick on, for the Monday show, we like to generally talk about what's going on in the news, current affairs, latest politics stuff. And Wednesday, we talk about some other, maybe not so newsy stuff. And then IQ supplements are generally historical topics or broader topics that I would discuss as a standalone podcast. But now we have so many questions that we now get more material for the IQ supplements. For this is better for me. But I just wanted to go on that. So we appreciate the questions, but we're going to give a little direction. That's all we got to say. So we're going to go off on the new Pope. Everyone, this is probably the biggest news from last week. And I was wondering if anyone's going to ask my thoughts about this. I don't have the strongest thoughts on the Pope. I mean, there were some people like, this guy's a demon. Or there were others that are like, this is going to be the most base Pope ever because of his name and what he took. And the Pope is an influential figure. I mean, there's not a single individual who is more influential on world Christianity than the Pope. Single figure. No one's in comparison. And generally, whatever the Pope says, media pays attention to. But the thing is about the Pope is that due to a lot of changes over the last century, is that the Catholic Church is less influential on secular political affairs than they were in the early modern era, of course, and even into the 18th and 19th century. Generally through the 20th century, it was a gradual decline. And then even with Vatican II, it accepted that it's likely not going to have as much secular influence as it once did. Secular political influence. That's always something to keep in mind. It's like, this isn't really electing a political leader. This is electing a religious leader. Obviously, doesn't have the best opinions on immigration. Pretty much every possible candidate to be the Pope was not an immigration hawk, except for the Hungarian. Even there was, not quite sufficient to what people want. But it's not electing a political leader; it's electing a religious leader. And the most you can talk about is how much this guy is going to interfere in politics or want to give political statements. Pope Francis loved to make political statements. He was a very gregarious, charismatic guy who loved talking to the media, loved causing a fuss in the press, and he was somebody that he wanted to make a statement all the time. Not a lot of popes are like this. Like Pope Benedict was not someone who weighed in on political matters. And I think the new pope is probably going to be less inclined to weigh in on contemporary politics than I think the last pope. I think a reason why he was picked is that they wanted a moderate administrator to focus on church affairs and not intervene into the secular political realm as much as Francis was. And so, yes, he's going to issue condemnations of immigration enforcement. There will be some benign statements or banal statements about welcoming the stranger, but I don't think it's going to be as much of a focus for him as Francis. I think he's going to be mostly focused on getting the church's finances in order, calming down a lot of the tensions and conflict within the church. I mean, there's already a lot of trads and conservatives are excited that, he's allowed for the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass in Rome. It appears he's going to take a different line on that. He's also not going to be more progressive in terms of allowing gays in the church or accepting homosexuality in the church or ordaining women. And so I think if you're conservative and worried about those church matters, so far it looks like he's going to be fine. I think but for those who are non-Catholic and are worried about the political implications of this pope, from what I can tell about the guy, he's more reserved than Francis. He doesn't seem like he wants to engage in the secular political realm as much as Francis does, or Francis did. And that's going to reflect a change in the church. And you would have to worry if he does decide to get into the secular political realm, because this is an American who speaks in a Chicago accent. And if he wanted to be like Francis and talk to the media all the time, the American media would love that. And he would just become, worst case scenario is that he just becomes a Democratic political celebrity where he just weighs in all the time to condemn Republicans for their racism or whatever. And then CNN and MSNBC are just fawning over the Pope, and we've got the Pope on our side, and Democrats are just becoming pro-Pope. And it's used to browbeat ordinary Catholics into opposing the Republican Party. Now, how much of an effect that would be, because like today, is that ordinary Catholics care less what the Pope says than they did 100 years ago, 150 years ago. It doesn't carry the same amount of weight as it would have in the 19th century. But it still matters. And if you have the Pope, it's racist to vote for Republican, and he's saying this as an American who speaks English fluently, which is different from Francis, he didn't speak English very fluently. He could speak it, but it wasn't, these statements would be something we would translate, which has less power and less effect on the American media sphere than, a guy saying this in English or perfect English. And so you would have to worry about that, but I don't think this is what the guy is going to do. I think he's going to just focus on internal church affairs. They'll issue the same, if there's some big scandal over Italy refusing boats or something, they'll issue some vague statement. Even there's this clip that they found that he gave a speech about immigration, which I think is reflective of what path he's going to take. In this clip, he's like, immigration is a problem. We have to solve this humanely. Now, this is completely open to interpretation. Some people are saying he's actually more reasonable on immigration, right-wing wise, than Francis. Others, you could interpret it as saying, the humane solution is to bring in more of them. But it's such a vague, ambiguous position that it's open to a lot of interpretations. Well, Francis, there was no ambiguity. It was, you need to bring these people in, you need to welcome them. While here, he's like, we just need to solve the problem humanely, which that could mean anything. And I think that's maybe probably the stance he's going to take, is that he issues these vague, ambiguous statements that, it's in the eye of the beholder of what he means. But I think that's more of his case, is that he doesn't want he doesn't want the church to intervene in those matters. He just wants to focus on church affairs. And I think for conservative Catholics, that's about the best you can expect. And also, what you can expect for within internal church matters is that he'll probably be a lot better than Francis. Now, this could change, and he could be Pope for 20 years or more. He's 69 years old, so and Francis lived to almost be 89. So, he could be around for a while. But I think I feel like he's going to be a more low-key Pope, not as much in the news as Francis. And I think for conservatives, whether you're a Catholic or not, I think that's an improvement from the last Pope. So I would say there's a lot of the kind of pessimistic and over-the-top posts and black pill posts about the Pope, I think were a little unwarranted. Now, we could be proven wrong. Maybe this guy will be even more political than Francis, and he will decide to be, full-blown, advocate for the Democratic Party, even though he's apparently registered Republican, and his siblings are very conservative, like boomer MAGA supporters. But we'll see. So I think I don't think there's a need to, it's over and have an apocalyptic tone about it. He appears to be much better than Francis. So that is my thoughts on the Pope. Now we'll go to some of the questions. We'll start off with Werner. Werner asks, is there a universal non-white aesthetic or ethos surrounding money? He talks about almost all non-whites, Chinese, Brazilians, Arabs, Africans, love these insane, ostentatious displays of wealth. Even in Southern Europe, they do this. What separates Northwestern Europeans and their money habits? I think in some ways is the cultural legacy of Protestantism that we have. Some people might not like this. I mean, a lot of American Catholics also have this. But a lot of that influence is from the cultural Protestant that ruled here. It's similar to Germany, that there's still a divide between the Catholics and Protestants, but even the Catholics are more modest than the Mediterraneans. And maybe you can even say France, but it is there was always seen as like a sinful display. It's like, that's not what you're supposed to do. This is frowned upon. We're all being frugal, and there's also that. And another thing is that we like to pretend that there wasn't these strong class distinctions, at least in our society, in American society. Even I could say in the UK and in Scandinavia and Germany, there was at least more of an attempt to not have these massive divides between people, where, more in Southern Europe and others, there would be like, oh yeah, well, if you're rich, you're definitely wanting to show it off all the time. While there, it's like, well, that's imprudent, so you're not going to do that. And so there's always been these long-term standards that this is not what you do. This is tacky. This is gaudy. This is even maybe sinful to do. Yeah, and you're just supposed to dress normal and plain. I think it becomes even more the case with America, because we didn't even like the ostentatious public rituals and ceremonies that was associated with the monarchies of Europe, and and the aristocracies, and we were really opposed to that, where our diplomats didn't dress in fancy outfits. They dressed in plain black suits. Andrew Jackson implemented this, and so that be carried on to within America, and even some of the Northern European countries also adopted it with hostility to ceremony and the ostentatious play of wealth. But this isn't the case for the rest of the world, and they feel that actually, if you're rich, you need to show it off. And they all love showing off this wealth. It's a way of showing status. It's like, oh, look at my car. This means I'm better than you. While here in America, we'll be like, oh, really? You think you're better than me? Or we'll have like, oh, maybe you're insecure about yourself. So we just have this social norm that's not into this. And I fully believe in it. I really hate ostentatious displays of wealth. I always view it as unbecoming. And maybe that's a result of the cultural Protestantism that I have. But, they didn't like those ostentatious displays in their church. And maybe that reflected it, and that went off into how you're supposed to dress. You're just supposed to dress plain and simple. You don't really you're not flashing gold around and other things. And, the wealth you have is just the fact that you can pass it on to your children, even though now we no longer do that. So, and, there's always this condemnation of not being frugal and just blowing your money on stupid things. And we always like to have these stories about, the father built up all this wealth and the son squandered it. So I just think that is, and maybe it was also a fact that we lived in colder climates. So maybe there was less things to spend, the wealth on or stuff. I don't know if that's really quite true. But we were more into hoarding stuff because maybe it was like due to the fact that we had harsh winters is that you had to spend all your time hoarding up things for the brutal winter. And maybe that is also something that is passed down to how we view money, is that we're saving it up and not wanting to spend it recklessly because we realize there's going to be a time where you're not going to be able to gain all this resources and you have to, hoard it all, which in more southern, warmer climates, they didn't have to worry as much about that. So those are some of my theories. 2, why do you think blacks and women are so averse to using AI? I didn't know that they are averse to using AI. Are they really? I've not really observed this, so I can't really speak much about it. The people who are really into using AI rather seem to be white men who are older, but it's like all across. I mean, this is such radically changing that I don't know if they are that averse to AI. With women, they're averse to AI because they're like, they're gonna create AI porn and stuff. So they're not really into that. I don't know. Blacks, it's probably they just haven't figured it out yet. But I don't know. A lot of the third world, the Indians absolutely love AI, and so do Hispanics. Hispanics love these AI videos. The problem is they think they're real. So I don't know. I haven't really observed that, so I can't really speak about it. So that is my answers for Werner. We'll go to New England Refugee, who asked about. We don't want to attack him too much, but he did ask the royal family question, which it's a good question. I think I don't want to hate on it too much, but we'll answer that next. His update on the reconciliation bill. Well, this is going to be a big week for them because the House is trying to pass the reconciliation bill before the Memorial Day recess, which is next week. So they are going to need it to pass it in the next few days. Really, I don't have much of a debate or update on it except for the technicalities of how a lot of conservatives are like, we want more spending cuts, and they're not getting a sufficient number of spending cuts. So a lot of the House Freedom Caucus guys aren't happy. And then a lot of moderates aren't happy because they feel that there's too much spending cuts, and maybe there's even some cuts they feel to entitlements within the reconciliation bill, which they're not. They feel that's going to hurt them. They also have worries that cementing the Trump tax cuts that he did in the first term might have a political impact. So, but everyone's agreement about more money for immigration enforcement. There's no controversy over that. Pretty much the entire Republican Party is behind that. That's not at issue at all. What's at issue is the spending cut stuff and the fiscal matters, which I think this is why it would have been better with 2 bills. If you got the immigration bill through, everyone would have voted for it. We'd already have it signed into law. We'd be having increased deportations, even better border security than what we have now. I mean, Trump's doing a lot to beef it up, but we permanentize a lot of these border security changes. So that would be good, but the fact is that they're now combining a big bill, which Trump decided he wanted because he wanted his tax cuts. He wanted to ensure his tax cuts are made permanent, are made more long-lasting. So he backed the one bill solution, but even if the House passes, it's still up in the air whether the Senate is going to accept it, and so there's still issues there. But if our main interest is increasing deportations, and the two bill strategy would have made this already possible now. The first bill would have already been passed, but probably the second bill would have never been passed. So that's why they decided to combine the two bills, and we'll see what happens. I think the House will pass it in whatever form it is. They still fear Trump, and they don't want to go against him. But if it doesn't pass, the one person who's definitely going to vote against it is Thomas Massey, and maybe that might be the deciding vote against it. So we'll see how it goes. But that's the update I have now. We'll probably have more updates next week because maybe they'll already passed it and Senate will give a clearer picture of whether they're going to accept it or not. So as second question we've been talking about a lot. What European royal family do you like learning most about? It'd probably be the Hohenzollern, the Prussian royal family, and the family of the German Empire. I always find them more interesting. I'm not that big of a Habsburg fan, and Romanovs I just find foreign. Obviously, they're all foreign, but a little bit too exotic. The British royal family, I never was really into whatsoever. Even though historic royal families, I think the Stuarts are interesting. The Tudors as well. I'm more into the older British families than the current one. And the Hohenstaufen, which were the peak of the royal family in the Holy Roman Empire. I found them interesting with like Frederick Barbarossa and Frederick II. They were doing a lot of cool stuff, so we like them. Not really that into French families. It's more just about what countries I like to learn the most about, and it's generally more German-speaking Europe. So you'd read more about the Hohenzollern, the Habsburg, and the Hohenstaufen if you're going and learning about medieval history. So you generally learn more about that. But even I like a lot of early modern English history because that's also influential in American history. So the Tudors and the Stuarts are going to be the ones who read most about. So I'd probably say those four. But if you're naming one, it'd be the Hohenzollern. So we've got that. Now we're going to move on to others. We've got Renown, who his question is, what's your opinion on the Victory Day Parade 2025? Was it the best parade ever? What's your prediction on how will perception of the Second World War evolve over the next 10 to 50 years? Will its importance decline? Will it diverge between East and West? Well, I guess you mean the Russian Victory Parade, which I didn't really pay much attention to. So I can't say it's the best parade ever. But I can talk about the perception of Second World War evolve over the next 10, 50 years. We always talk about like, well, it's 80 years ago. Why do we still obsessive over it? The thing is the West doesn't have another historic myth to replace it. And a lot of the way the world exists today is the result of the Second World War. And not only does America care deeply about it, but Europe cares deeply about it, and Russia cares deeply about it. The only places that don't give a shit about it is the entire non-Western world. Like Latin America doesn't care that much about it. They weren't involved. I mean, Japan cares about it, but they they lost, and so they're maybe looking on to move on to other things. I mean, it is also important into China's history, but China's also, there's a lot of awkwardness about it because they have kicking out Chiang Kai-shek, who were primarily involved in fighting it. So, and India, Middle East weren't that involved in it. So it's in Africa wasn't involved in it either. So a lot of the non-Western world isn't into it, but it still makes for this founding historical myth, and we see current events through the prism of World War II. And unless something else replaces it, it's still going to be massively important. I don't think its importance will decline. I think some of the taboos around it may decline, which I guess this goes. You could bring up the HH song right now of the most famous rapper in the world, hiling Hitler in his chorus, which that is definitely something. And I think among young people, there's maybe less of a taboo around these things than boomers and Gen Xers had. But we're still going to be talking about it and still calling people we don't like Nazis. And we're still going to bring up the concentration camps. Or we're still going to be talking about this campaign is just like storming Normandy. It's a very important historic event and it becomes a grand mythos for us, and we haven't had anything else to replace it. And in fact, it's replaced all other American history. The only things in American history that even stand as in comparison to it are the founding and the civil rights movement, and maybe the Civil War. But the Civil War has significantly declined in importance from what it was like in the 60s and 70s and probably the late 20th century. When I was growing up in the 90s, Civil War mattered a lot more to people than it does today. I think a lot of that is due to the fact that fewer people have ancestry there. There's something like very old and about it that I think a lot of newer Americans aren't as into, and younger Americans aren't getting into it as either. We also don't make as many historical references to it or in debate. We're not calling the villains like Confederates. We're talking about traitors being copperheads, and all these type of things. So it doesn't really influence current debates in the same way that World War II does. The only thing is that Abraham Lincoln is still a very important historic figure. And in terms of the most popular historic figures, the three most important figures are Lincoln, MLK, and George Washington to ordinary Americans. But people aren't caring as much about the Civil War. But it's still in, the three other events that matter to people. It's probably one, the founding, because we always talk about like the founding fathers. We still reference it. We still reference the Declaration of Independence and obviously the Constitution. So all those events still matter. And second, civil rights movement, because it's the second most important American historical figure to ordinary Americans is Martin Luther King, and three is the Civil War. But I think those things are going to continue to matter less over time. Like, I'm sure that we're going to care less and less about those three things over the next 10 to 50 years. But I'm not sure how we're going to treat Second World War. I still think, it's still going to be massively important to our conception of the world and conception of history in the next 10 to 50 years. And it'll certainly be the case in Europe, and it'll certainly be the case in Russia. When even they're arguing over Ukraine, it's all been about World War II. Like, we only see Ukraine through the prism of World War II. Both sides accuse the other of being Nazis. Europe demands we, keep giving infinity billions to the Ukrainians because we've got to stop the new Hitler. And they're like, we experienced this 80 years ago and we're not going to do this again. And so it still matters a lot. And in a lot of ways, it's become even more important as fewer people were alive during it. In the 60s, I would still say the Civil War was the most important historic event for America. It's what we mostly cared about. The 100th anniversary of the Civil War, there was a ton of huge events around it. 150th anniversary that happened a decade ago, no one really cared. And it's becoming even less important. I mean, the 160th anniversary of Appomattox happened last month. I didn't even see tweets about it. So it's that those things are becoming less important. In terms of creating a divergence between East and West, I don't think there is that much of a divergence. It's just they interpret it differently for their current political objectives. Russia is important. It's relying on World War II to fight the Nazis in Ukraine. We're relying on World War II to fight the supposed Nazis of Russia. And pretty much a lot of conflicts that we're going to have in the future is still going to be, we're fighting Nazis here, and then the other guys are saying, well, we're fighting the Nazis of imperialism. And a lot of popular media is still obsessed with World War II. We're still going to have popular video games and movies about it. So I don't think it's going to decline in importance. And even in this stuff about, breaking the taboos and stuff, like the Kanye song, that's still reinforcing it. We're not having a song like Hail Jackson or something. That it's the fact that, you have a popular rapper make that type of song referencing a historic figure. It indicates the continuing importance of the Second World War to the general public, and that there's still a greater degree of knowledge around World War II than any other historic event. So that's my thoughts on that. Let's go to Stealth Bomber. He's got. Is there anything from a policy perspective, is there anything that can be done about the growing gambling epidemic, or is this ultimately a cultural problem? On the right, Republicans seem to embrace it for the insane revenue it generates. On the left, however, I could imagine Democrats eventually targeting it as a way to curb the favorite pastime of young men. John Oliver even did a segment recently on the dangers of sports betting. What is your take on this? There is so much damn money in it that there's no way that they're ever going to restrict it. It is ultimately a cultural problem because in the past, there would have been a strong lobby against it. There would have been the religious right. And the religious right had its problems, but I think on the gambling and some of all their social vices, they were correct. I think it would have been great if we still had them around to oppose sports betting, but we had them around when they were in the 80s where they focused a lot of efforts on heavy metal music and Dungeons and Dragons. But we need them more to go against FanDuel. But there's now no powerful counter lobby to the gambling industry. They have a ton of money, and they give a lot of money to these politicians. And if any politician was going to oppose them, there is no counter lobby to provide a grassroots support base or money for them. So when we still had the religious right strong in the country, there was this massive constituency that would back candidates to be opposed to gambling. But now there is no longer that constituency, and there's no money in opposing gambling, but there is a lot of money in expanding it because, these companies are washing cash. They are putting a ton of money into lobbying, and there's no money and no support on the other side. It's going to make it very difficult. Now, I do agree. It is interesting. You could maybe see Democrats get into it if they view it as a public ill. But right now, it's not. The only thing I could see that would change people's minds, and I do think this is likely to happen over the next decade, is if a guy makes a huge bet and he loses and he goes and tries to kill a popular athlete. If a popular athlete is assassinated over a sports bet gone wrong, there could be so much public outcry about it. And also the players' unions could force their leagues to cut off ties with the betting apps if that happens. Now, a lot of the players don't want to do that because their money also depends on the popularity of sports betting. Is that they're starting to get bigger contracts, like even in the NBA, they're like the salaries are going up significantly. I think it's the same throughout sports, is because of the popularity of sports betting. And if they eliminated that, then their salaries would go down. And so, general economic concern, they're going to want to not take away their money. But players have complained about it, but they know that they're making so much money on it. But if one of a very popular athlete was killed over this, that could create public outcry to change sports betting. Which maybe it would restrict on it. It's like they can only bet on scores of games. Like they cannot bet on the player performance and stuff like that. There might be stricter rules around it. I think it's a very likely scenario to happen in the next decade, is that because these players do really complain about how they're getting a ton of threats and harassment over their play from guys due to sports betting. There's already been a lot of complaints, and It's just a thin line across for some guy to want to. I mean, they threaten to kill him anyway. Somebody's going to be crazy enough to try it. So I think that's the only thing that could really change. But barring that, there's no counter lobby against the gambling lobby, and that would be the only way to get politicians on board. And there's no clear constituency that really cares about restricting gambling anymore. There was in the 80s and 90s with the religious right, but there's no longer that. I even remember at the time, like in Tennessee, it was very controversial when we passed the lottery, when we implemented the lottery, because there's a lot of evangelical Christians in Tennessee, and I had one teacher who was like, "I'm voting against it because I find it sinful to encourage gambling." Now it'd be like weird, like no one would care about this, and this is over 20 years ago. But there's no longer that sentiment is not as prevalent in our society. I mean, there's probably even a ton of evangelicals who are now engaged in sports betting. So, just one of those changes you've had over time. But I don't want to say this is a hope, but I would say if that type of event happened where an athlete got murdered over this, that could create the change to implement restrictions on sports betting. If players would want this, some restrictions, even if it hurts their income, they still prefer their lives over their money. All right. Questions from Ken. Thoughts on Audio Slave? Are they new metal? I don't like Audio Slave. No, I'm not. I wouldn't say they're new metal because Chris Cornell doesn't rap, and they don't really have much black influence in their music, as you would say. It's just like a straight. It's more of just a straight hard rock band that's really trying to imitate, the 70s rock greats like Led Zeppelin and other things. And it's more of a mix. I mean, yeah, the rest of the band was in Rage Against the Machine, which besides Chris Cornell, but it's not new metal. It's just straight hard rock, but I'm not a fan of Audio Slave. Second, I got off Twitter just for productivity reasons. I know you're anti-checking out, but it's honestly very pleasant to just plan trusting Trump besides the tariff. Should I check back in? Sure. I know a lot of people checking out right now, but sometimes I feel like I'm checking out. Like I don't post as much anymore, but I find it like the more time you spend on Twitter, you're not as productive as you were before. But I'm able to get more work done because I don't feel like there's as many interesting conversations on Twitter as much as in previously. So yeah, maybe just check in once a week just to see what's going on. But it's not even that. It's not as good of a news source as it once was because what's talked about on Twitter is not really what is talked about in the normal news. So and that is one of the issues I do have with X is that. In the past, you could find out a lot about news. You'd see what people are talking about, normal people. And now it's what extremely online people are talking about. And it's generally the opposite of what normies are discussing. So, but checking out every once in a while is fine. We'll go to Luke. Thoughts on Trump's executive order targeting pharma companies with the price controls? I'm always a plan truster, and but I don't like price controls. I think price controls are a bad policy, even though those pharmaceutical companies do suck. There needs to be more restrictions on it. No, we really need to encourage more competition. Is that it's run like a cartel where their interests are fully secured and they want to charge their own rates. There's this big push against pharmacy benefit managers, which Big Pharma is leading because they don't like them negotiating the prices and restricting prices on things. There's a lot of debate over that, but they really just want to have more control over the industry and not have any other mediating factors such as increased competition or neutral third parties negotiating prices. They just want to set the prices and it would be absolutely sky high, which they are now. But price controls is never really a good policy. It never works in the way it's intended. So I do have some skepticism about it. But it is for drugs rather than things that it's proven to fail, like rent control. Rent control always fails. It's always bad. But as a general policy, I'm not a fan of price controls. But I am big anti big pharma. So hopefully something works out with there. But we'll look into it more in the future. We'll go with K Max. Let's see. He's like. All right. Well, he's got 3 questions, which we'll just save one for the mailbag. He's asking about how we can get normies on immigration. Or he says, I think the normie position is we need skilled labor, and if the best and brightest students of the world want to come here, why can't we let them? Is this an accurate assessment of the average white person? Legal immigration is still largely supported with growing intolerance towards illegal immigration. As an addendum to my question, highly skilled seems desired. They think taking in highly skilled, smart immigrations is smart policy. And he's relying on Gallup and Pew Research polls. No, that is it. Immigration debate is tricky. And this goes to my question about how to get people to oppose Indian immigration. Is that it's very tough to get people to really hate or oppose Indian immigration because they don't bring crime. They're not welfare cases, or at least in the majority they're not. They're seen as entrepreneurs or high-skilled immigrants. And even for a lot of conservatives, and even politically, it's more politically potent to say that they're taking blue-collar jobs than taking white-collar jobs, especially for conservatives. Because, as I said before, we like the idea that white-collar workers are not us, but conservatives love the idea of white-collar workers being laid off and being unemployed and being forced to do menial labor. I mean, that's like a real goal for conservatives. I mean, when the tariffs happened, the fact that they were gonna take away all these white-collar jobs and send them off to be miners was talked about as a great thing for the tariffs. But so it's hard to sell that to our people. But so if you're just saying these legal immigrants that are coming here, they're skilled, they're entrepreneurs, they're not committing crime, they're not welfare cases, it's very tough to get people to oppose them. And there's not as much fervor around them taking white-collar jobs as there is around taking blue-collar jobs. Even though more people want those white-collar jobs than the blue-collar jobs, we still feel that it has more powerful impact on the public to say they're taking blue-collar jobs than they are taking white-collar jobs. And that becomes a problem with selling legal immigration as a skilled labor thing. And I think that's one thing where Europe has an advantage over us, is that they simply don't want the immigrants, period. And pretty much all their immigrants, they don't even do low-skilled labor. They just come to take welfare. They don't get skilled laborers. They get skilled welfare cheats. That's all they do. They don't get any of the high-skilled. None of these people are entrepreneurs whatsoever. They're there. And also there's the cultural differences where, they don't have this history of assimilation in the melting pot. They just invented this post-World War II to accommodate the new circumstances. So they're able to have a more universal no immigration here than in America, where we're like, well, if they're working hard and they're not taking welfare, then what's wrong with them? And so you still have that. But I mean, the thing is like hostility to illegal immigration is still big, because under Biden, pretty much all our immigrants the majority of immigrants who came here illegally. And so if you get people to strongly oppose that becomes a way to make them opposed to legal immigration as well. But we're still getting there. I mean, more Americans, it's a plurality of Americans do support immigration restriction or cutting legal immigration. And that's an improvement over the first Trump term. So, but yeah, the average white person still likes legal immigration, so long as you're not using welfare and you're working hard and you're not taking blue collar jobs or something. As long as you're taking a job from a bugman, it's okay. Even though a lot of them are hiring blue collar and migrant labor, but whatever. And then a second question we'll ask is like Trump will now admit white South Africans as refugees. How important is this in terms of the highest office recognizing white victims of anti-white racism? How big of a victory is this from where we were back in 2016? Yeah, it's a massive victory because this was never thought possible in the first term. If you had been telling people that this would be the case in 2025, they'd have been like, there's no way that they're ever going to create refugee status for white South Africans. But here they did. And it is a massive victory for our side. And it does show like there is this, Overton window pushing. That's something that was not thought possible, is that we'll start granting refugee status on the basis of anti-white racism while restricting refugee status for for most other groups. That is a big deal. So yes, it is a huge victory from where we were in 2016, where no one in American politics was even talking about white South Africans and what was going on there, to the President of the United States granting them refugee status and then wanting to sanction South Africa for discriminating against them. Next up, we have Gillis Enjoyer. Gillis asks, with the China trade deal being signed this weekend, do you think the tariff situation will now recede into the background of the news cycle? The market will stabilize, and the main story of the administration will be immigration DEI again. Yeah, I think we might still have some instability in the market and some other things that happen, but most things are going to stabilize. I don't think Trump's going to try any of this type of shenanigans again. It is funny that they reach a trade deal quicker with China than they did with Europe, which, you're it's another L for Europe, unfortunately. But yeah, I think market is going to be stabilized. A lot of the things that we thought that were going to take place and the market was thrown over, it's going to be there. But this is also indicating that a lot of people were asking me, it's like, don't you think this is going to upend the entire global economic order and change it? I think it's more reaffirming it with some minor concessions and a few changes around. I think they realized they did this experiment to see what could happen with a fully economic nationalist regime. And then they realized that this is going to destabilize the economy too much and it's going to have way too much political backlash. So they decided to take a few minor concessions and focus on the other things that most people voted for them, which was immigration DEI. And I think that's the most you can expect. I mean, you could want this experiment, but if it happens, a lot of people are going to suffer for it, and it's going to create a lot of chaos, and no political party in America wants to bear the brunt of that. So I think, but we're moving back to stability, and I don't foresee any more radical changes in the future, but we could be wrong. 2, did you see Chris Murphy's lecture to Kristi Noem about DHS's activities? It was very aggravating to watch. He was incredibly smug and almost like he was scolding a middle school teacher, or he was a scolding school teacher, claiming that she was violating immigrants' rights and that everyone had a right to seek asylum. Do you think she or other administration officials should have shot back and accused the Democrats of wanting to continue an invasion against the will of the American people? Or do you think it's better to just let Murphy and his ilk cope and seethe while we focus on getting shit done? It's probably just not that as important as this stuff would have been in the first term because, like I said, there's declining interest in news and in media from what it was like 6 or 7 years ago. And they would all do these viral, like clapbacks at these hearings in order to boost their political profile. And Chris Murphy is likely going to run for president in 2028. So he's hoping that these type of public antics can help his political star power. I think it is better if they want to, accuse Republicans of that, to say, well, you want an invasion of the American people and that American rights matter more than asylum rights, and then present cases of supposed asylum seekers that turned out to be criminals and murderers and rapists, and to say, why do you stand with these people? And I think it's Kristi Noem is probably not the person to do that. She's maybe not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but other administration officials should shoot back with those type of rebuttals. So that would be my comment on that. Now we got Arm Day Enjoyer. I think we got Arm Day Enjoyer. All right, he's wanting these for the mailbag. I don't know if he meant, or no. He actually, no, I'm mistaken. It's for the regular episode. But his two questions are: for our side, U.S. decline is largely demographics, but I have seen some entrepreneurial types online who say the U.S. just isn't the same anymore, preferring places like Dubai or Singapore. Why? What do these guys refer to? Ad nim. My guess is the urban decay, but it seems that decay was already there 20 years ago. Well, Dubai and Singapore, they even have like less restrictions on entrepreneurship there, and they have these like immaculate cities that are free of hobos and crime. They do have stricter rules there that you have to abide by. You know, you can face strict penalties for, again, Dubai, like drinking in certain places that, that's going to be frowned upon, but, or more than frowned upon. It could get you in legal trouble. But so they do prefer that because these are just like massive playgrounds for Westerners on business. Like where even in New York City, you're going to go there and you still have to worry about getting mugged, and there's all this, dirt, and it's not as clean, and there's even more restrictions there than there is in Dubai and Singapore. So they prefer to go there as well. It's a type of dream that they no longer have to be rooted in the country, and they can go to be in an entrepreneur's playground. And these countries are desperate for people to move there and start up companies or do whatever there, do business there than in America. And I know a lot of Europeans that are going to these places to set up because of the heavily regulated and restricted regimes they have in Europe, to where, if they want to start a business, it's nearly impossible to do so in Europe. So if they want to do something, they go to the Gulf states. And that's just the case. So I don't think it's that big of an impact on us. It's a bigger impact on Europe because their entrepreneurial types are all leaving. Our entrepreneurial types, for the most part, are staying here. We still keep a lot of them. I mean, we're still the center of entrepreneurship. But there are a few who feel that there's opportunities elsewhere and they take them. But I think for the majority, they still stay here. And if you like the type of playground atmosphere for them in those cities, then you'll take that. And it's just depending on preference. I think, but a lot of people would just rather stay in America. Maybe they love the land of their forefathers, even though a lot of these guys don't have much ancestry here, but they just prefer America rather than the Gulf states. So that's just it. But I mean, even with there is still an expat thing, which I think is less. It has some degree of decline from the COVID height, where the COVID restrictions happened and all these people were able to work remote, so they moved to various cheap cities around the world. Mexico City became a destination, Lisbon became another, a couple different places in Europe, and I think also some people made it their way to the Gulf states. It was just that they didn't, they were pushed out and they could work from anywhere, so might as well live in a cheaper, nicer place. And there's still that case with Americans who are doing that, but I think that trend reached its ceiling, and especially with people demanding that they return to work in the office. So I think this is less of a problem for America than it is in Europe. That'd be my final thoughts on that question. So his second is more of a comment, but it seems online you never are allowed to say anything nice about the U.S. Foreigners all expect U.S. citizens to fetishize the outside world and shit on their own country. Many expat travel types also engage in this type of content, but when you point it out, they claim there's good and bad. I don't know if that's so much the case. I mean, there's a ton of American chauvinism, and I'm not using that as a pejorative. That's just what it is. Like, America's awesome, posting on X and other social media. I do think a lot of foreigners are more anti-America now this year than they would have been a few years ago on social media. And I think it's also because they hate the tariffs. They're maybe upset that Trump's not giving enough money to Ukraine or whatever. I mean, this is very much true for the Europeans. And so their inner anti-American has just come out to complain about America over these issues of the tariffs and the lack of support for Ukraine. But I think even among a lot of Americans, especially with the right, anti-American sentiment on right-wing Twitter is at a low point. It's mostly like the European mind can't comprehend this. Europor is now widely used. Like everyone is shitting on Europeans, which that wouldn't have been the case with the online right a few years ago. But now it's very much the case. And that we have a much bigger role and influence on Twitter than we did in 2021. So I don't know if I see. You're definitely encouraged to say nice things about the U.S. and it goes viral, at least on X. And that has to be the case on Facebook. I doubt like your family friends are going to enjoy you shitting on America on Facebook. So I don't think it's as prevalent as you might think. There certainly is. Foreigners are more anti-America now than they were a few years ago, and there's a lot more foreigners on these places, but Americans, I think, are a lot more pro-American than they were in the 2010s. That's my thought on that. Online at least. So we got that. We'll go to Dollar Bill. Dollar Bill says, should Trump follow up the renaming of Gulf of Mexico by signing an executive order rebranding the English language as the American language? The United States does have the world's largest share of native speakers, and it would be a huge flex on the Brits to retroactively have Chaucer and Shakespeare write their greatest works in American. No, he should not do that. A lot of these ideas are stuff that like the Colbert Show would offer as satire 20 years ago, and now we think like we should actually do this. Actually, we don't speak English, we speak American. No, we should absolutely not do this. There's a level of chauvinism that goes into ridiculous territory, and that is where the declaring the English language as the American language is. No, I fully oppose that. I'm not even that big of a fan of Gulf of America. I know it's cringe. A lot of people are like, oh no, it's awesome. We're calling it Gulf of America. It's like, who gives a shit it's called Gulf of Mexico? It is definitely one of these Colbert Show ideas that was introduced as satire in the 2000s, and now we're reappropriating it as actually a good idea. We're already America. We don't need to call the Gulf of America Gulf of Mexico. I don't think there's that many people who are upset that the Gulf of Mexico was called the Gulf of Mexico rather than the Gulf of America. It's not as big of a deal as like calling it the Arabian Gulf rather than the Persian Gulf, which the Arabs really want that because they don't like the Persians. But I think people didn't really care much about it. I'm only gonna give the thing that I don't really care about it. I think it's a little silly on the podcast. I don't want to tweet about it because everyone's gonna be like, this goes back to the last question where it's like, oh, there's so many people critical of America. The fact that a lot of the online sphere thinks Gulf of America is awesome rather than a joke does show the changing attitudes towards these, that it's not that as anti-American as you would think. In the online space. If this had been done in George W. Bush, everyone would have mocked it. No, they would have been like, this is the dumbest thing possible. Now we think it's cool, I guess. I don't think it's that cool, but I don't care that much about it to raise a fuss. But calling English language the American language, no, please don't do that. It's actually worse because English signifies the ethnicity, the ethnocultural group that created the language. With American, it eliminates that ethnic underlining to it. Now it's just open to everyone. And the American language, it's now like, oh, guess who had an important role in shaping the American language? our lovely diversity. We created this language through diversity, and there's no ethnocultural context to it. You eliminate that by saying it's the American language. And no, it's important to keep it the English language because you want to emphasize who brought the language here, who created it, and it's a specific ethnocultural group. It was not created in a vacuum through diversity. It was created by the English. And our core ethnocultural group is the Anglos. And by calling it the American language, you are flexing, you are eliminating that core cultural component and affirming America as this idea that it's, a melting pot language and it was just invented in a vacuum, independent of any unique or distinct ethnocultural group. So yeah, actually, I am very much opposed to this. It's not only is it stupid and ripe for mockery, it also is cringe and blue-pilled for that aspect I outlined. So that is my question. That's my answer on that. I think we are down to LK Rurik. So we'll say if anyone is eager to talk about the Yay song on for the mailbag, which we can probably properly discuss the lyrics on Substack rather than YouTube, you can ask it for the mailbag. But we'll save it for LK Rurik, the poster formerly known as Mishaus. His question is, I've used Windows, Linux, and Mac PCs and iOS and Android smartphones. Generally speaking, the Apple product scored highest in having pretty displays and being idiot-proof, but lowest in actual functionality. Despite this, their products are shockingly popular to the point that they've almost single-handedly caused the tech illiteracy epidemic in Gen Z. What's the Greer head solution to the Apple cut question? Well, I probably should have singled out this question rather than the royal family one for people not asking current topics. It's a great question. I guess I would just say this. I was always a PC guy. I did not like Apple growing up. I thought Apple was a libtard product for hipsters. So that was just always my thing about Apple. But I eventually came around to liking iPhones and iPod. That's how old I am. I still use an iPod. I like to separate it from, I like the fact that I don't receive calls on it. So when I'm driving and I'm at the gym, I'm not getting a call or text. I'm just listening to the music. So I only like that, but I never liked Macs versus PCs. I always liked the functionality of PCs versus Macs. I've never liked using a Mac. But to each their own. I don't really have strong thoughts besides I don't like the functionality of Macs. And the old reputation of them, I think, is no longer the case because even in those old ads where they had the cool hipster played by, I think the actor's name is Justin Long, and versus the nerdy white guy, Justin Long is ethnically ambiguous. He's a hipster. He's cool. And then there's a nerdy white guy in glasses, and it's I'm a Mac. I'm cool. I'm diverse. I'm multicultural. I'm down with it. And then it's the PC guy is old, white, or middle-aged, nerdy, white, uncool. You don't want to be like that. You want to be like a Mac. And that's what I stood with the PCs. That was my white identity moment there. But outside of that, I don't have any strong opinions. I don't know what the Greer head solution to this. We do not have. I will not use Apple products in the Greer head pledge, and I've always preferred them for phones over Androids. And also, you have to use iPhones because if you get the green text from someone, you think this is a scam. It's not so much the low status now. It is, if I see green text, am I talking to a real person? Whenever I get green text, you're like, this is like an Indian or something. But when you get blue, you're like, oh, it's a real person. It's like a signifying it. And you don't get that with the green text. So it is what it is. I don't really... It's fine if you use Apple products. We're not going to use Apple Cuck on this podcast, so I don't have a solution to this. So sorry, LK Rurik, that we don't have a solution to this. So that is it for Highly Respected today. We are, of course, going to have a fantastic mailbag for Wednesday, where we will talk about a lot of great topics. If I did not get to your question today, which I think I got to every question, please harass me. I always encourage harassment if I didn't get to your questions, but I'm pretty sure I got to everyone. So we will answer that for the mailbag. We got normal schedule this week, so be on the lookout for everything that we have coming for you. So until next time, stay respected.